let's say, for example, I own a supermarket and I have an employee. How can I protect myself against anything that goes wrong with the employee personally, that won't, so that it won't affect my own business?
Okay, so there are two ways. If it's a standard business and a contract is involved, there's some clauses you should have in your contract. One, you always have a mutual hold harmless, which basically states that this is the extent of your liability in case something happens. For example, if there's a contractor's employee is injured, on your site or your property, or dies on your property, for example, or equipment is damaged, that mutual hold harmless says that, basically it says that, oh, when you come to my site, even though you come to work in my site, you're responsible for your employees. So if anything happens to your employees, you won't be responsible. If injury or death, you won't be responsible. If your equipment you're bringing to site gets damaged, you won't be responsible. So also both parties. So I won't be responsible for your own employees. You won't be responsible for my employees and my assets already. So those are clauses that people find. Sometimes they will tell you that even though the clause is there, you will only be responsible when it's a case of gross negligence or willful misconduct. That means if, for example, I send my employees to work in your site, and there's a hole which you refuse to cover, that's more like a willful misconduct, and it can also be a gross negligence on your part. So you can include that in. But if it's generally something that happens which you didn't even know about, then it shouldn't be held responsible. Also, most businesses should always have something they call a company representative. So meaning that company representative is the one that represents the company. So there might be other employees there, but you can only hold the company representative for anything that's been done. So that way you limit liability to one particular person, maybe your manager or something. So if another person asks anything funny, you remind the other person, oh, remember the only person we told you that you should deal with is the company representative. Then also, most transactions have, in contract also has what they call limitation of liability. So if anything goes wrong, you want to cap your liability a particular, it might be 20% of the contract sum, it might be 100% of the contract sum. So if it goes beyond that, you're not responsible for that. That way you have capped your liability under a particular threshold that you think you can afford. Then generally, insurance is very important. Your employees, liability insurances, if an employee does something that will have to liability towards you, the insurance can pay for it. Then if it talks about small projects and other things, you can also have all risk insurance. Anything that goes wrong, insurance takes care of it. And other forms of insurance that covers liability. So it's important that insurance is a very key thing that unlike we have in the UK, that it's quite important. Here we still trying to get to know the importance of insurance. It even goes down to your house, your wristwatch. You can insure it. You can your house against burglary, against a comprehensive one that covers burglary, flood, everything. Armed robbery, everything. You can have insurance. So like we're having cars insurance also. Let's put it third party, but it's comprehensive also. Comprehensive can cover every single thing. So insurance is very important. Then contracting must be very tight, so that way you can limit your liability. Imagine if in a contract liability clause is 25% of the contract sum, and maybe the contract is a 100 million naira contract, 25% of the 25 million naira. So if by adventure your employees go about and incur 50 million damage or claim, you know that you can only pay 25%. Yeah, so that's it. So that we have, it's a cap to what the employees can incur on your behalf. Yeah, so basically contracting insurance quite important in capping your liability. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I've actually learned a lot. So for a business owner that wants to separate himself from the business, what are some things they can put in place to do that?
Okay, so basically under the law, a company is a person on its own. So you can sue it and it can be sued. So the way I'm regarded as a person, if I have a complaint, it's supposed to be a different person. Yes, I am the promoter of the company, I'm the owner of the company, and I might be responsible for it to a certain extent. Now, the way you do it is separate both your person from the company as a person. I wrote an article for Applied Journal of Business and Economics, New York, and 2020, I believe, and it was on company. I think it was titled "Companies' Right to one's nationality, and it was based on the EU law, and it's still valid to us in Nigeria, because each company can choose nationalities, can choose, because it's a person on its own. So for you to own a company, I used to advise people that will be great tomorrow need to start from the beginning, in the sense that when you're not setting up a company, also know that your assets of a company is different from your personal assets. It has to be divided into two. And that's where it comes into things like they call trust. Now, most rich people have trust in place. Trust in place means that, for example, I set up a trust, I buy a house, I buy it in the name of the trust. That's why you hear some people have a house in London, but if you check the papers, it's not the name of the person. The name of the person is still like trust company. That way, if anything happens to the company, it doesn't affect them personally, because the trust owns their assets. Now, why did you do that? Because usually, even though the company is a different person, usually when a bank wants to give you a loan, for example, in Nigeria, it will at least ask for a personal guarantee of the owners. You set up a company today, you need 100 million naira loan from a bank. They won't give you 100 naira loan, because most likely you never have a collateral to even meet up with the loan demands of the loan, provisions of the loan. So what happens? They'll tell you that, oh, since no collateral in place, you seem to be a very rich man. Why don't you put your assets into it? So that way, they make you sign a personal guarantee, meaning that if there's a default on a loan by the company, the personal guarantee takes care of it. So yes, sometimes you are forced to do that because you need that money to make your business. But that way, you have also already joined your personality into the company. And when there's a default by the company, they go for your personal assets. But if you have a trust in place, that trust is not in your personal, it's a trust complaint, not in your personal. It's not more even your personal assets again. So even if you have a trust in place, it's only the company's the assets in your personal name that the bank can go after. They can't go after what in your trust. So that way, even if the company folds up, your assets are still in place. So I'm telling you that every millionaire or billionaire in Nigeria needs, most of them have this, because they found a way of separating their personal assets from their company. So if anyone goes under, personal assets in trust are secured. And usually that trust, you might have it in names of their wife, names of their children. Just set up a trust company, we're paying taxes on the assets there and everything. So it's also a person on its own, different from your personality. But that way the assets are well secured, and anything that comes after them by virtue of personal guarantees, cannot touch the trust. So that way you have a total separation of your person from the company as a person. The trust is a different person totally. For example, let me give you an example now. No, it's a maritime company. You have ships. A maritime company that has ships most likely won't want to register the ship under a particular company. For example, I have a company ABC Limited. I buy a ship, EF. When I'm registering that ship, I want to register the ship under ABC company. I'll register a whole entity for that ship. Why? Because when all the assets of the company are different, registered differently, if anything happens to one, it doesn't affect the other company. Because under the law, they are distinct and they're a separate company from each other. So that way, when we have multiple complaints, that way we are securing ourselves individually, and we're not putting all your risk in one box. So one can fail, go bankrupt. That's fine. But the other one is still standing. That way, you're separating all your assets and keeping them off each other. So if any liability occurs, you're safe, basically.
When can a business owner be actually held liable? Because you mentioned it. When can a business owner actually be held liable?
If you sign a personal guarantee using your personal assets, then you can be held liable. Because the banks too are smart. They want to have enough collateral. Contractors or companies that do business with you want to see your value in case it goes wrong. So they always want to add as much as possible to it. But so as long as you pledge in your personal assets, then you are liable. So but the best thing I keep saying is this: from the beginning of the complaint, separate it. It's more difficult to do that later, because if you are doing it later, if for example I pledge my personal assets to a bank, for me to avoid paying my loans to the bank, for example, I quickly go and create a trust account and move it from my personal self into that trust. Then that's you becoming fraudulent, because you're doing that as a reaction to avoid liabilities for something you have pledged yourself for. So what's better to do it from the beginning when it's clean, and in law, they say if who comes with equity must come with clean hands, So come with clean hands from the beginning and separate from the beginning so that you won't have that issues. And you can still do later as much as you don't have liabilities you have pledged your assets to. Once you have liabilities you have pledged your assets to, then at that moment it's pretty late because the bank will tell you you're quite fraudulent in your actions. Yeah.